Good morning. So today's agenda, today's conference, brings together two very important themes. One of them is the theme of localism. This new bill going through Parliament, and it's got its second reading on Monday, and I'm in the position now of being on the bill committee for this bill, is going to define the way that communities, and in particular parishes, town councils, in other words, the most local level of government, drives change in our society. The details of that bill we're going to talk about later this afternoon, but the basic message of the bill is local communities know more, care more, can do more than more distant officials. By which I mean know more, care more, and can do more than officials, sometimes in Penrith, sometimes in Carlisle, certainly than officials in London, still less in Brussels. The basic energy of this is about the ways in which communities, at their own speed, when they wish, right, this isn't a forced imposition, but when a community wants to take responsibility for something, when a community wants to drive something forward, the burden should be to assume that they know more and can do more, and there should be a very, very good reason to stop them. The basic assumption, basic pressure should be let the parish or let the group of parishes drive ahead. Let's move out of a world where the parishes have to only suggest or be consulted. Let's assume that they know what they're doing. And let's create a situation in which people want to serve on parish councils because they have the power, the responsibility, sometimes the financial authority to bring change. That then brings us to broadband. The reason why, in a sense, the entire national agenda around localism and the big society is focused so much on broadband is because it is almost impossible to imagine delivering super-fast connections to rural communities without communities themselves playing a very, very large part in that rollout. The reasons for that begin with problems of money. If you were, for example, to look at the Penrith and the Rory constituency, which has about 27,000 homes, and were to attempt through a conventional method to connect every one of those premises to fibre, you would be looking at about £5,000 per premise. And I don't need to do the maths for you, but you could discover that you're looking in the small hundreds of millions of pounds simply to connect Penrith and Rory to fibre. The government has, to kickstart this programme, provided a small amount of money for a pilot. But that money is being spread very, very thinly. Part of that money will go to the district, but not all of that money. So you're looking at a proportion of £10 million being spent in an area which, if it were to work simply through a government central procurement, would require, let us say, 120, 150 million pounds to connect. Which brings us to communities. If communities are prepared to gather, if they're prepared to define the demand, aggregate the demand, in other words, if the community is prepared to get together and say 70 or 80% of the people in this community will use a super-fast connection, that changes the economics for any provider. And suddenly they know that the cost of bringing, for example, the fibre into that community is shared between many more users committing to a monthly contract. If communities are prepared to waive the way-leave charges, if they're prepared to dig in the fibre themselves, if they're prepared to think through the network at a very local level, if they're prepared to look at alternative methods of providing, they should be able to drive the price down very, very significantly. And it could come down from £5,000 per premise to, for the sake of argument, these are back of the envelope calculations, but maybe £1,000 per premise. If communities are prepared to put their own money into the situation, right, if, for example, a community is prepared to say, or an individual is prepared to say, I'll put £1,000 in this over 20 years, maybe the government makes a loan so that you pay it back at £60 a year, sorry, £60 a year, pay it back, over a slower period at a lower amount, you end up in a situation where suddenly all the economics begins to make sense. Now, the reason why this happens is not because the government has suddenly cut a programme. And the government was never going to be able to afford to spend, I suppose if you look at the Australian model, 15 to 20 billion pounds on trying to connect every home in Britain to superfast broadband. This was only ever going to work if we could significantly reduce the cost, significantly reduce the time by getting communities involved. How is this happening? Well, one way in which this is happening, ironically, given that we are driven by problems of lack of access, is through an internet site. And if anyone in this room has not signed up to Broadband Cumbria, please do so. It is the most fascinating example of communities driving change. There are parish areas where parishes are defining exactly what's happening. So Charles Paxton here with his camera has been leading a lot of the work around the Bennett area. Now, all those parishes are looking at where cabinets are located, what infrastructure exists on the ground, what kind of demand there is, what kind of alternatives they can pursue. People are putting forward some very, very exciting proposals on technology. A latest post, for example, by Barry Ford got no less than 340 different individual comments hammering in on that. Anybody who wants to learn more, please go on that site. Anybody who wants to set up their own parish site, please do so. The key to all of this, though, is going to be that the only way, and this is maybe making a slightly bigger, more abstract point about parishes and about government, this isn't going to be able to happen through parishes alone. It is also going to rely on very, very flexible imaginative work by private sector companies. And from the largest companies, such as British Telecom, Bill Murphy here on the stage, through to much smaller companies, community interest companies, perhaps companies like Guides there at the back. So companies are going to have to think very, very flexibly about how they can provide, at what price, in what design. And the government needs to do an unbelievable amount of work. And it's on this maybe that I can finish, because I want to leave as much time for questions as possible. Broadband is, of course, in some ways a relatively narrow, specialized subject, but it is a subject of eye-watering complexity. Every single time someone in this room thinks that they've found the silver bullet to solving the problem of how to get super-fast broadband into their home, they encounter another obstacle. There are, of course, obstacles to technology. So one thing you'll find if you ever go to a broadband conference is that exactly the moment that you think that you're talking about fibre to a home, the advantages of fibre to home, you can absolutely guarantee that somebody from, for example, a company that provides a radio or wireless solution will stand up and say, just give us a bit of time, we will provide it through radio and wireless. And you say, oh, that's terrific. When can you do that? And they say, well, we're just waiting for a new spectrum auction, and maybe in 3 to 4 years' time, we may have developed a new form of technology which will allow you to get super fast speeds. So there's some technological problems. The second problems are problems of existing infrastructure and design. So every time you identify existing fibre networks in the ground, you may think, oh, well, this is very easy. I'm just going to attach my bit of fibre to that fibre that exists in the ground. But the exact design of that fibre, you know, whether it actually runs directly from home or runs in a bird nest from home to home, or whether it's connected to a school and what the school itself backpulls into, and the charging related to that, is going to transform the entire economic model. Then there are questions of regulation. Ofcom comes in. So every time you feel, and I'm making it sound very complicated, but I'm going to come up with the conclusion, there's no point concentrating on the detail, but every time you think, oh yes, now I've got the point, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say to this or that provider, instead of charging me £70 per meg per month, charge me £2 per meg per month. The answer comes back, I'm afraid that's a regulated product. Ofcom has defined the wholesale price and you can't negotiate it. The bottom line on this is not the detail that I'm talking about. The bottom line is that the incredible emphasis it puts on civil servants and politicians to understand this level of detail and to be able to challenge private sector companies, other civil servants, and communities to make sure that we really get the best possible solution, rather than simply giving up and saying this whole thing's too complicated. Right? In order to run a good procurement here, in order to make sure that the taxpayers' £10 million goes as far as possible, we need to understand this in so much detail. And that, I suppose, is what I'm going to conclude on. The work of everybody in this room, the patience of everybody in the room, the knowledge of everybody in the room, organised initially almost parish by parish, but using conferences like this, using broadbandcountry.com to share ideas from one community to the other, is the only way we are possibly going to overcome this massive information, interrogate the realities of the infrastructure provision. What we're going to end up with, I suspect, and this is maybe the way of setting up expectations, is not going to be a complete solution, either provided by a big private sector providers such as British Telecom or by communities. What we are probably going to end up with is a mixed solution, right, in which a big provider like British Telecom, which at the moment has very generously now decided to provide the cabinet of Kenneth, will provide a lot of the solution. But we would also like to look at a situation in which communities or community interest companies can themselves provide their own solutions, and that will depend community by community. Around, for example, Moorland, around Crosby Ravensworth, there is an enormous amount of enthusiasm at the idea of fibre to the premise fibre home. People are prepared to put a lot of energy and time into thinking how to do that, and a lot of energy and time to thinking how you use that. Fibre to the home is the most astonishing thing. It provides these unparalleled speeds, but it's only really at the moment of interest to people who really know how to use that technology, who have the demand for those kinds of speeds, who are prepared to pay for those kinds of speeds. We need to be able to give the freedom to communities who want those kinds of speeds, who are imaginative enough to think how they can use them in terms of their businesses, in terms of health, in terms of education, to be able to do that. But we also need to acknowledge that there are going to be other communities who, for whatever reason, may not wish to organise in that way, may not wish to dig in their own fibre, may not wish to pay the extra amount they want to pay. So, thank you all very much indeed, number one. Number two, if you haven't signed up for broadbandcountry.com, please do so. Number three, anybody in this room associated with any parish, any project, please do not hesitate to bully me. Everybody in this room will always know more about their individual area than someone like me is ever going to know. I will be speaking nonsense a lot. Please challenge me to say, actually the entire solution that you've come up with makes no sense at all for our community. Right? We have a huge limestone escarpment in a way. No, you can't set up a cellular network here. Actually, we already have a cabinet in the ground. No, you've dislocated the fibre optic cable network. Pushing back, challenging will make that £10 million go better, will make procurement much more efficient, and hopefully will give us the best super fast broadband network in Europe. Thank you all very much indeed.